Thank you for agreeing to this conversation today, which is a part of the Carter King Legacy exhibit at the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site in honor of the centennial of the National Park Service. From 1971 to 75, you've served as governor of Georgia. Right. And in your inaugural speech, you said the time for racial segregation is over. I want to know, where did that attitude come from, and why did you think it was important to say those words at the beginning of your administration?
Well, I'd say two major things. One is that I grew up in a segregated society. I lived on a farm in an isolated community called Archery, Georgia, and we had about 200 African Americans there, and we had 2 white families, and mine was the only one that had children my age. So I was immersed in an African American culture from the time I was a little child. My mother was a registered nurse, and she was gone a lot. She served in the surrounding community among the African American families, quite often on 20-hour duty. She would come home at night at 10 o'clock and leave again at 2 o'clock, and so we didn't get a chance to see my mother very much. So I was raised by African American women who lived nearby. And so I could see from that early experience on until I graduated from high school the ravages of racial discrimination. And so I was determined to get rid of it as much as I could, and that was one of the reasons that I ran for governor. And the other reason was that it happened at that historic time in my life, that the historic time in America's life took place with Martin Luther King Jr.'s crusade for racial equality. And of course, we were observant of the things that went on just as a farm child, and later as a young farmer myself when I came home from the Navy. So I would say that the combination of the civil rights movement in my own early life were the 2 factors that led me to make that statement. But the time was over for racial discrimination in Georgia. I can't say that doesn't still exist to some degree.
Right, exactly. And I must admit I agree with that, even though I was a little kid at the time. Now, as governor, you actually placed a portrait of my father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., on the wall outside of the governor's office. You really didn't know my father, but I'm wondering what precipitated that.
Although I never knew your father personally, I was just a peanut farmer and didn't have a chance and so forth. But I was very close to Martin Luther King Sr. and to your mother, Coretta, and to Andy Young and others that worked with Martin Luther King Jr. And I thought it was time for some symbolic change to take place in the state capitol. He had been criticized, as you know, by many of the state legislators. They had rejected earlier proposals to put his portrait in the governor's office region. And so I thought it was time to do it. I think that was the first time I sang We Shall Overcome with Your Mother, as a matter of fact, when we had that ceremony. There were Ku Klux Klan members walking around the Capitol while the portrait was placed there, and we had that wonderful experience together with your family members. But I think Georgia was ready for it, and we had, I think, a big change in Georgia for a while, and also in the United States for a while. But unfortunately, later, including the most recent years, there's been, I think, a resurgence of racial discrimination and the division of white and black people.
So you mentioned my grandfather, Daddy King, as we all know him affectionately, and my mother. And you've had a long-standing relationship with the King family. So I was a kid when all of this started. I remember seeing you around, but I couldn't appreciate all of the interactions and the extent of the relationship. So just share with me, so I'll know a little bit about that relationship.
I knew Daddy King better than any of the others at first. When I was running for governor, one day I remember I was campaigning in Milledgeville, Jamaican area, and I had missed breakfast and I had missed lunch, and I got to see your grandfather about noon, and I remember sitting there while he had a big bowl of a big plate full of fried chicken and collard greens and cornbread, and The main thing I remember about the first meeting with your grandfather was my mouth watering while he ate lunch. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He just figured I had already eaten, otherwise he would have invited me to join him. But he was a great help to me when I ran for president. Mm-hmm. And when I got in trouble with some misplaced words on answer to other much more aggressive and ugly interviewers than you are, he would bail me out, and your mother did too. In fact, Coretta came all the way to California to make a speech one time to help me when some people accused me of being a member of a segregated white church in Plains, Georgia, the Plains Baptist Church, where I was baptized. And she came out to California to testify that was the way it was all over the South, and that I didn't have any choice, as a matter of fact, even if I wanted to take a choice. So your family helped me be president, as a matter of fact. And I have said in many speeches that I would never have been considered as a candidate for President of the United States from the Deep South had it not been for Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement.
In fact, I remember being at your inauguration, and you had my grandfather do I think it was the closing prayer?
It was, yeah, it was. And it was a rip-roaring prayer.
Very memorable.
People may have forgotten the rest of the inauguration, I mean, who was inaugurated, but they remember that closing prayer of his.
Yes,
it was wonderful.
That was a very important moment in our life, and of course I know in your, the beginning of your...
And your mother, by the way, was in our private quarters with me and Rosa. And watched this ceremony.
Wow, now I don't remember that.
Yeah,
I don't even remember how old I was, but I was fairly young. As president, you've done something that no president before or after has done, which is the creation of more national parks. You've created 40 national parks, and you've protected over 157 million, that's a lot, acres of land for future generations. Why was that important for you?
We more than doubled the size of the National Park Service. We tripled the size of the wilderness areas.
Wow.
And one of the most significant things I did was in 1980 when I signed the law that created the Martin Luther King Historic Site. And I was with your mother when we announced that I was going to do that in 1979, and it was 1980 when I signed that bill. So that's kind of brought the Carter Center and the Martin Luther King Center together, not just geographically, because we're close to each other, but I think historically as well.
But you did more than any other president. That's significant.
Benjamin Mays,
can't miss that.
Benjamin Mays made a statement one time. I don't know if he wanted to take it back before he passed away, but he said, "I did more for the black education system than any president who ever lived, including Abraham Lincoln."
Wow.
And I was an honorary